It's time for another screencast for Earth Science. In this screencast, we will be discussing the moon and its phases. So let's float into the screencast. A satellite is a natural body that revolves around a planet. So, yes, the moon is a natural satellite, and is one of more than 96 moons in our solar system. Our moon is the only moon of the planet Earth. We say natural because Earth now has thousands of artificial or man-made satellites that circle Earth. The moon is about 384,000 kilometers from Earth, and about 3,468 kilometers in diameter. That's only about a quarter the size of Earth. The moon has no atmosphere, no liquid water, and goes through extreme temperature changes from, let's say, 130 degrees Celsius in the day down to somewhere around 190 degrees Celsius at night. This helps us to understand how important our atmosphere is to life on Earth. It would be impossible to survive with such extreme temperature changes in a 24-hour period. The Earth is covered in lunar craters. They could be 2,500 kilometers across. Most were formed by meteorites hitting the surface of the moon, and some were formed by volcanic action inside the moon. The Maria was originally thought to be seas by early astronomers. They appear darker than other areas are, and actually are just low-lying areas filled in with lava, which cooled into basalt rock. They are relatively crater-free. The Highlands are higher and filled with more craters than the Maria. They also appear lighter in color. Moonlight is reflected sunlight. The sunlight hits the surface of the moon and is reflected to Earth. Half the moon's surface is always reflecting light. From Earth, we see different amounts of moon's lit surface because we can only see different amounts of the reflected light. The amount seen is called a phase. Here is a list of each phase of the moon. This is a great illustration of why we see different phases. Remember, you are standing on Earth and would be looking at the moon from Earth. So these yellow lines point to what you'd be looking at, and the pictures around the outside show you what you would see if you were standing at the base of the yellow line. Here are the four shapes. Take time to draw them on your notes. Now, it takes 29.5 days for the moon to revolve around the Earth. The moon does not make any light of its own. The light parts that you see are called phases. The moon reflects light from the sun that we see as those shapes mentioned earlier. As the moon moves or revolves around the Earth, it looks like it has different shapes. The shape of the moon does not really change. It just changes its location in space in relation to the Earth. It means the phases we see are just which reflection space the moon is in. Let's take a closer look at the phases of the moon. During a new moon, the moon looks dark. Can you think of why it looks dark to us on Earth? The sun hasn't stopped shining and the moon hasn't stopped reflecting. So, if you're not sure, check back on the earlier slide to see if you can come up with the answer. I'll discuss more about this later. As the reflection of the surface of the moon is getting bigger, we say the moon is waxing. And if the shape is crescent, we say it is waxing crescent. When the moon is quarter of the way around in its first quarter, we see it as half lit, and we call it the first quarter moon. After the first quarter moon, the moon will continue to reflect more light off its surface, leading us to a gibbous moon. A gibbous moon is any moon that reflects more than half but less than full. As the reflection amount increases, it gets to move its way toward a full moon. But as it increases and it's over half full, or half of the moon is reflecting light, we call this a waxing gibbous. As the full moon is reflecting the entire moon, we call this a full moon. This is the easiest one to grasp, as everybody calls it a full moon. And the entire surface is reflecting light. Now we're going to go back to gibbous. However, we are changing the name because after the full moon, the light reflecting off the moon will start to decrease. As it decreases, we call this a waning moon. And if it's in between a full moon and half lit moon, we call this a waning gibbous moon. And as it continues to diminish, it will eventually get to half lit. This is called a third quarter moon, as it will continue to diminish light. The last quarter, or the last part of this lunar cycle, is a waning crescent. We're still in the crescent shape, but now we are losing the reflection off the moon, and it is still waning, so it is called a waning crescent. Here's a good illustration of what we see. The bracketed areas shows what we would see if we were on Earth. And we can see the shapes and the names of each phase of the moon. Now let's review. A new moon is a moon that is not visible from Earth. The moon is between us, or Earth, and the sun. Therefore, the dark side is facing us. This one only lasts one night, and we will start the cycle and start going into a waxing phase. Once we have the waxing phase and we have a crescent shape, we call this a waxing crescent. Less than one half of the moon is illuminated, but more than none at all. It can last 3 or 4 days, and only a small portion is visible. Now, when the entire right side of the moon is illuminated, it is called the first quarter moon. Notice it's the right side. This phase only lasts one night. Now, after we get past the first quarter moon, we are going to continue to increase light, which is why it's still waxing. In between a half-lit moon and a full moon is called a gibbous. This phase includes the night after the first quarter moon to the night before the full moon. When the moon is full and bright, and the entire face of the moon is illuminated, this is called a full moon, and again, only happens one night per lunar month. Then we go to diminishing light, which is where we get the word waning, and if it's in between full and half, it is gibbous. So now we have a waning gibbous moon. Now the left side is starting to be the bright side. Now if the left side of the moon is half lit, we call this the last quarter moon. This one only lasts one night. And if it's less than half, but more than a new moon, we call this a waning crescent, if it's on the left side. Now, I will touch briefly on lunar eclipses, as we will get into that on the next section. However, when a moon moves in front of the Earth and creates a shadow we call this a lunar eclipse. There are different parts of the lunar eclipse I'll get into more later, but there's the umbra and the penumbra. And there's about 2 to 3 a year, depending on where you're at, and they can last up to 4 hours. You have the solar eclipse, where the moon moves in between the sun and Earth. And as the solar eclipse doesn't happen very often, there's really only one about every 360 years in your location. There are more, but just doesn't happen in the same spot but once every 360 years. Now, we have landed on the moon. In the 50s and 60s, there was a huge push for space exploration. And as they did, Neil Armstrong became the first man on the moon, July 20th, 1969. There were 6 other Apollo missions that got to the moon, taking 12 Americans. Now, can you name this phase? Of course you can. It's the full moon. How about this feature? Craters. Or this one, the Maria. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.